The sun dipped low over the sprawling campus of Georgetown University, casting a golden hue over the ivy-covered buildings. Students bustled across the quad, their laughter and chatter filling the crisp autumn air. Among them was Barron Trump, the youngest son of the former First Family, who had chosen to step out of the political spotlight and into the world of academia. Tall, reserved, and fiercely intelligent, Barron had always been an enigma to the public. Here, he was just another student, or so he thought. Professor Eleanor Hartman, a renowned political science professor with a sharp tongue and a penchant for controversy, was known for her fiery lectures and unapologetic liberal views. Her classroom was a battleground of ideas, where she often used her platform to critique conservative figures with biting sarcasm. Today, however, her target wasn't just a political ideology. It was personal. Barron sat quietly in the back of the lecture hall, his notebook open, pen poised. He had always admired Professor Hartman's intellect, even if he didn't agree with her politics. But today, something felt different. The air was charged, and the professor's eyes gleamed with a mischievous intensity as she began her lecture. "Let's talk about privilege," she started, her voice dripping with irony. "Privilege isn't just about wealth or power. It's about the audacity to think you're above reproach. Take, for example, certain former First Ladies who've built their entire personas on, well, let's just say, very little substance." The class erupted in nervous laughter. Barron's stomach churned. He knew exactly who she was referring to. His mother, Melania Trump, had always been a lightning rod for criticism, but hearing her mocked so publicly, so viciously, felt like a punch to the gut. Barron's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He had learned long ago that not every battle was worth fighting. But as the professor continued, her words growing sharper and more personal, he felt the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him. This wasn't just about politics. It was about respect, about dignity, about standing up for the people he loved. The room seemed to hold its breath as Barron slowly raised his hand. Professor Hartman paused, her eyebrows arching in surprise. "Yes, Mr. Trump," she said, her tone laced with condescension. "Do you have something to add?" All eyes turned to Barron. The tension was palpable. This was no longer just a lecture. It was a showdown. Barron stood, his tall frame commanding the room. For a moment, he hesitated, the weight of his words heavy on his tongue. Then, with a calm but firm voice, he began to speak. "Professor Hartman," he said, his tone measured but laced with quiet intensity, "I understand that this is a place for debate, for challenging ideas. But when those ideas turn into personal attacks, they stop being about discourse and start being about cruelty." The room fell silent. Even Professor Hartman seemed momentarily taken aback. Barron continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "My mother has been a constant source of strength for me. She's faced more criticism and scrutiny than most people could ever imagine, and yet she's always carried herself with grace and dignity. To reduce her to a punchline in a lecture hall isn't just disrespectful. It's beneath you." The professor's face flushed, but before she could respond, Barron added, "I came here to learn, to grow, to engage in meaningful conversations. But if this is what those conversations look like, then maybe I'm in the wrong place." The room erupted in murmurs. Some students nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Professor Hartman, clearly caught off guard, struggled to regain her composure. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice tight, "this is a classroom, not a therapy session. If you can't handle the heat, perhaps you should reconsider your choice of major." Barron's eyes narrowed, but he didn't back down. "Respect isn't about politics, Professor. It's about humanity. And today, you've shown very little of it." With that, he gathered his things and walked out of the lecture hall, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The incident quickly became the talk of the campus. Videos of Barron's confrontation with Professor Hartman went viral, sparking heated debates on social media and beyond. Some praised Barron for standing up for his family, while others accused him of playing the victim. The media, always hungry for a Trump-related story, descended on Georgetown, turning the quiet campus into a circus. Barron, however, refused to engage with the press. He kept his head down, focusing on his studies and avoiding the spotlight as much as possible. But the tension between him and Professor Hartman only grew. In the weeks that followed, their interactions became increasingly strained, with the professor making subtle jabs at Barron during lectures and Barron responding with icy silence. Meanwhile, the incident had sparked a larger conversation about free speech, respect, and the role of personal attacks in academic discourse. Students and faculty alike were divided, with some siding with Professor Hartman and others supporting Barron. The campus became a microcosm of the broader political divide, with protests and counter-protests erupting on the Quad. As the weeks turned into months, Barron found himself increasingly isolated. His friends, wary of the media attention, began to distance themselves, and he found it harder and harder to focus on his studies. The weight of his family's legacy, combined with the constant scrutiny, was taking its toll. But then, something unexpected happened. One evening, as Barron was leaving the library, he ran into Professor Hartman. She was alone, her usual air of confidence replaced by a rare vulnerability. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Professor Hartman broke the silence. "Barron," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it, "I think we need to talk." Barron hesitated, unsure of what to say. But something in the professor's tone made him pause. "All right," he said cautiously. "Let's talk." They found a quiet corner of the campus, away from prying eyes and ears. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Professor Hartman took a deep breath and began. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I crossed a line that day, and I've been struggling with it ever since." Barron was stunned. He had never expected to hear those words from her. "Why now?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Because I realized something," she replied. "I've spent so much time criticizing others, so much time trying to prove how right I am, that I forgot what it means to be human. I forgot that behind every political figure, every public persona, there's a person, a mother, a father, a son. And I forgot that my words have consequences." Barron looked at her, his anger slowly giving way to something else, something like understanding. "It's not easy," he said quietly, "being in the public eye. People think they know you, but they don't. They see what they want to see." Professor Hartman nodded. "I can't imagine what that must be like," she admitted. "But I do know that I let my own biases cloud my judgment. And for that, I'm truly sorry." For the first time in weeks, Barron felt a sense of relief. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means a lot." They sat in silence for a while, the tension between them slowly dissipating. Finally, Professor Hartman spoke again. "I'd like to make this right," she said. "Not just for you, but for the class, for the campus. I think we all need to have a conversation about what happened, about respect, about empathy, about how we can do better." Barron nodded. "I'd like that," he said. "But it has to be real. No more masks, no more agendas. Just honesty." Professor Hartman smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Honesty," she agreed. "I think we can manage that." The following week, Professor Hartman announced a special lecture titled "The Power of Empathy in Political Discourse." The lecture hall was packed, with students and faculty alike eager to hear what she had to say. Barron sat in the front row, his presence a silent reminder of the journey they had both been on. Professor Hartman began by acknowledging her mistakes, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've spent my career teaching you how to think critically, how to challenge ideas," she said. "But in doing so, I forgot to teach you something even more important. How to listen, how to empathize, how to see the humanity in others." She went on to share her own experiences, her struggles, and her regrets. And then, to everyone's surprise, she turned to Barron. "Barron," she said, "you've taught me more in these past few months than I've learned in years. Thank you for your courage, for your honesty, and for reminding me of what really matters." The room erupted in applause, but Barron remained seated, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Not as a Trump, but as Barron. In the weeks that followed, the campus began to heal. The protests died down, the media moved on, and life at Georgetown returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. But something had changed. The incident had sparked a broader conversation about respect and empathy, one that extended far beyond the campus walls. Barron, too, had changed. He had found his voice, not as a Trump, but as himself. He continued to excel in his studies, but now he also became an advocate for respectful discourse, using his platform to promote understanding and bridge divides. Professor Hartman, for her part, became a different kind of teacher. Her lectures were still passionate, still challenging, but now they were also infused with a newfound humility and empathy. She and Barron developed a mutual respect, a bond forged through shared vulnerability and growth. As the semester came to a close, Barron stood on the steps of the lecture hall, looking out over the campus. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the ivy-covered buildings. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He had come to Georgetown seeking knowledge, seeking growth, and he had found it, not just in the classroom, but in the lessons of empathy, respect, and humanity that had transformed not only him, but everyone around him years later. Barron Trump would look back on that moment as a turning point in his life. It was the moment he learned that true strength isn't about power or prestige. It's about the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Professor Hartman, too, would remember that day as a defining moment in her career. It was the day she realized that the most important lessons aren't taught in textbooks. They're learned through humility, through empathy, through the willingness to admit when you're wrong. And as for Georgetown, the campus would forever bear the mark of that transformative semester. It became a place where difficult conversations were had, where bridges were built, and where the power of empathy was celebrated. In the end, the story wasn't about politics or power. It was about humanity, about the choices we make, the words we speak, and the impact we have on each other. And it was a reminder that, no matter how divided we may seem, we all have the capacity to change, to grow, and to find common ground.